I've had a lot of people asking questions the past few days about whether they want triples or VR and really which one's best for what. So I decided to share what my field of view looks like uh, in triple screens. So these are set up with three 27-inch screens. I went with 27s because the pixel density at 1080p and 32s was just not something that I could stomach, and the price for 1440p is a little bit more than I wanted to spend for, I don't want to say disposable monitors, but dedicated monitors that are just going to sit on my race rig and not be used for anything else. So I went with three 27-inch gigabyte 1080p curved screens, a 1500R curve, 165 hertz refresh. So these are good modern monitors, and they were fairly inexpensive. I want to say about $229 each. So it's right about $800 or $700 in screens altogether. And I've got VR as well, but I think that VR is probably left for other games, and I think triples is probably better for racing. So you'll see as I've got cars up here, we're going to catch up to this guy here in just a second. You're going to see why triples are better. So one of the things that kind of sucks about the VR headsets is unless you're spending a lot of money on like a Pimax or something like that, you're going to wind up with only like a 120-degree field of view. Whereas here, I've got a lot bigger field of view in that. So I've got basically from the roll bar to the outside of the passenger side mirror all in my view at the same time. And what that means is as I approach a car and I get up onto its quarter panel, like so, I can see him going in and out of the side without having to physically turn my head. So there he is right there, right? So he's right next to me. I can see all that in my peripheral. And I can't see that if I'm in VR without having to physically turn my head and lose focus on what is that's going on in front of me. So that right there is pretty big. So if you're running, if you're running wheel-to-wheel racing and you're side by side with somebody, it's a huge advantage to be able to see everything that's going on around you all at once. So I've got the AI set pretty low just for demonstration purposes here, but you can see when you set everything up correctly, they're virtually seamless as they go across the bezels, or in this case, I have bezel-less screens. You can see them cross from one screen to the other, and it's just smooth and it's aligned, and it's awesome. And modern games do a good job with the soundscaping that you can hear what direction they're coming from, and you can check your mirror and you can see what's going on all at once, and you just don't have to stress about it. So the other reason why I went with these particular screens is that 1080p, I'm able to run all the graphics as high as they'll go in the game. In iRacing, I'm not quite able to do that just because I draw a lot of cars to be able to get as many data points as possible. But in iRacing, I'm still able to run a combination of medium to high detail, more on the high with a couple of medium spots sprinkled in to keep frames up. And even at Nürburgring yesterday, I was able to maintain 65 to 85 frames per second, regardless of the lighting situation or the traffic situation or whatever. So 27-inch 1080p, I think, is probably, I don't want to say the best. Obviously, bigger to a point would be better. But I think 32s at 1080p, if you can get over the cost of spending money on dedicated monitors, 32s at 1080p would be amazing. But unless you've got a little bit of extra money to burn at roughly $200 a piece or less, if you go with a lower spec screen, I think 27s at 1080p is probably the ticket for racing, because even set up on a table with not the greatest positioning, this in my race rig will be brought all the way up to the wheel, so I'll have better field of view even still. Woo! uh, I think the 27s at 1080p is probably the best bet as far as like getting the most bang for the buck out of the out of the hardware that you probably already have, as well as giving yourself the ability to enjoy games now and into the future. All the motion and everything that's going on the screen here, in VR, I'd have to turn a lot of that down to keep from getting motion sick. On the triples, it's weird because even though it's the same motion, right? It's easier to stomach. You don't have to stress about it. It's just there, and you can enjoy the simulation for what it is. Whereas in VR, it's like the novelty of it is cool, but I've got a button box over here. I've got buttons on the steering wheel, and without being able to run a replica steering wheel of exactly what it is that I have on the screen, it's very difficult to know where all your buttons are all at the same time without having to actually look. So anyway, the long and short of it is, coming from somebody who's got both, who's got actually triples, single screen, a larger single screen, and VR, I think as far as sim racing goes, I think triples is probably the way to go. It doesn't cost as much money to set up properly as VR. You know, I've got $700 into screens here. VR is $300 or $400 for a decent VR headset, and you got to have a lot of graphics processing horsepower to do it. But with triples, you can utilize even basic hardware, something along the lines of a GTX 1060, a 1070, AMD Radeon RX 580. Those will push triples just fine. Whereas you're not going to be able to use those video cards and get a respectable experience out of VR. So anyway, that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I just know that after a few days of playing with the triples, I am a big fan, and I wish I would have gone with triples quite some time ago.